4 years. My wife, she was on there 20 years. And in those days, they had the old ticket machine where you dished out one ticket at a time, rolled it, as opposed to what it is today.
Parts of the old tram depot buildings were used until they were knocked down when the depot was closed in 1995 and a housing estate was built on the site. As well as the public transport system, there was a private hire company in Luton. This site on Beacon Road was occupied for many years by the successful firm of Pilcher's Coaches. Pilcher's Coaches started in 1859 when Edward Pilcher had saved up enough money to buy a horse and cab which he used for hire. He worked hard and soon owned 3 more cabs. Then he started a horse-drawn bus service from the old Gun at Strood to the Hen and Chickens in Luton and ran outings for local organisations. The business flourished. His sons took over and it changed from horse-drawn and became a successful business running coaches all over the country and on the continent. The firm finally closed down in the 1980s and in the 1990s the site was cleared. The last building to go was the Pilcher's house on Beacon Hill. Luton High Street is still well provided with shops. There also used to be numerous small shops in most of the side streets, but they have all disappeared, converted into private houses. This was Mrs. Scott's shop in the front room of her house in Connaught Road. Guest's greengrocer's shop at the top of Edinburgh Road is on the right of the picture with the awning. One of the last to go was this shop in Coronation Road, which closed in the early 1990s. Luton School started in a small building built alongside Christ Church in 1845. This school only taught boys and only up to the age of 10. Girls were admitted later and the number of children attending the school grew rapidly. In 1910, Luton School was built in Luton Road and later expanded to cover the whole site alongside Pheasant Road. The original school buildings by the church continued to be used for some classes until the middle of the 20th century, when they were demolished. It is interesting to see the changes in the pupils over the years. Luton arches were built in 1857 when the London to Chatham railway line was extended to Gillingham and then on to Dover. They consist of 3 arches. Originally the main Chatham to Dover road went through the left-hand arch, the second arch led to Luton Road and the third to Magpie Hall Road. However, as the traffic increased, the layout of the roads around the arches changed. And in the 1960s, the buildings, which used to be on either side of the arches, were demolished to accommodate the new system. It is interesting that the trains in 1888 took 56 minutes to get from Chatham to London. Today, more than 100 years later, the journey time has only been cut to 45 minutes.
As you say, you go under Luton Arch, on the right, the bars was there, and there was a little kind of garden with a few seats there, and we used to call it Itchy Park. The old tramps used to sit in there, and there was a big trough for the horses to drink out of.
Beyond the arches, the road continues up Chatham Hill. One of the most noticeable differences between these photos taken about 1910 and today is the lack of traffic in those days. This is the blacksmith's forge at Hale. The building is still there, but now it houses a glass and mirror workshop. Just beyond that old forge is the Wagon at Hale pub.
Well, I took the wagon in 1961. A bloke who had it before me was Mr. Humphreys. I know a drop of whiskey was 2 shillings. I knew that. And I think a pint of beer was about 2 and fourpence. Oh, that's the cheap beer, mild, was 2 and fourpence, round about that way. And a light ale was about, I suppose about 9pence, a light ale and a brown ale. We were talking about the old money. Then like we had the room, we used to play darts in there. And we used to play cards, we used to have euchre we used to play in there. And we used to have a kind of euchre drive, so many tables, and they gradually switch round. The winners go to another table and as they go round. Then we had a men's dart team, then we had a ladies' dart team and all. Then I had the bat and trap pitch made, it was just all open.
The Wagon at Hale is still a very active pub, but other pubs in Luton have not been so fortunate. The White Horse on Chatham Hill now sells pizzas, and the new inn on Luton Road, seen here about 1910, was still open when we filmed this video, but closed the day after we filmed it, and is now a Chinese takeaway. No video about Luton would be complete without a mention of the gypsies, who for more than half a century occupied a site on Ash Tree Lane.
And in the old days they were known as the Upper and Lower Encampment, and our place was in Beacon Road towards the end near Luton Recreation Ground, and our grandfather had ground on Ash Tree Lane as well, and the two pieces of ground went back to each other, and we could go from our ground in Beacon Road straight up the bank into Ash Tree Lane. And in the first houses in Ash Tree Lane, not houses, in the first places that were built there were sheds down near the bottom. They were really quite nice sheds, and that was where the Arnolds lived. And in the same piece of ground there were the Macklins, and they had a wagon there. It was a Burton type wagon, which was really nice. And then in the next piece of ground from there were Brazils, and going up further there were then Picketts and Eastwoods, then Kemps, and there was a house, an old bungalow that an old chap named that we used to call Old Isaiah lived in. And then right up to the top, near the steps themselves, there were the Butlers. It was a mixture of traditional gypsy caravans and huts and buses converted for the use of living in. They would live in practically anything that would give them a roof over their head. My grandmother had an old bus that she lived in. All the seats were taken out, and a bed was put across the back for her to sleep in. And on the same piece of ground there were caravans that my Uncle Jim lived in. And there was a double-decker bus that the Picketts used to live in. They lived downstairs and their bedroom was upstairs. Like our family, we were kind of more settled those days, and so all my brothers and sisters, we all had what you might call a proper education. We went to school full time. But lots of the other kids, their families would go away in the summer and we wouldn't see them for perhaps 6 months, and then they'd come back and they'd go to school in the time that they were home. So they had really a broken education rather than a full-time education, and on the other hand they may have had a better Romany life than we did.
We integrated very well with the other kids, especially in the local area where we lived. There was no difference between the gypsy boys and the normal boys that we call gorgers, non-gypsies. We just got on together. There's no animosity or problems. We had our own gangs in those days, and the gangs used to be both cultures. There's no problem. So one of the pastimes that we used to get up to was making our own barrows. We used to get an apple box for the for the main seating area of the barrow. We used to get some scraps of wood to make a sort of a running board and some old pram wheels to assemble it with. And the front wheels used to have a hinge which was made up of a nut and a bolt, and to actually make the hole through the wood we used to get a red hot poker, run through the house with the red hot poker and burn a hole through the barrow through the wood to make the hinge for the front wheel so you could guide it. And we also used to make a covered top on it sometimes with some old sacking to make it look a bit posh. And we used to race these barrows down the lane at the end of the Beacon Road. And sometimes we used to fall off and graze all our hands and our knees, and we'd hide that from the parents so they wouldn't stop us doing it in the future. And also we used to go sledging, not in the snow but actually in the summertime. We used to make our own sledges out of wood, and we'd take them over to the Darling banks, and we used to grease the wooden runners with candle wax, or nightlight was the preferred medium because that was supposed to make them go a lot faster. And we just raced down the grass banks. Sometimes it was a bumpy ending and we ended up winding ourselves, but we always got a breath back and go back for more. So we really did have some fun, but different to the way the kids do it these days.
The gypsies were finally moved from Ashtree Lane in the 1960s, but many of the families stayed on in Luton, and especially in Beacon Road.
I hope this video has given you some idea of how Luton looked in the past and how it has developed over the years. It started off as a cluster of farmhouses which developed into a village and later on became joined to Chatham. Now the Luton is totally surrounded by the Medway towns, but despite that it has always managed to keep its friendly village atmosphere.